Hello guys. Tonight, we trip back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile, to a society famed for pyramids, pharaohs, and gods that watched your every step. But beyond the glittering masks and majestic temples is a far darker reality today. We're asking what would happen if you lived just one day in ancient Egypt, because, let me tell you, the sun isn't the only thing that will roast you alive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that nice background. Hum, and let's ease into tonight's voyage together. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and unrelenting ultraviolet violence before you even open your eyes. The sun is already bursting into your reed house, like it's auditioning for the part of cruel sky god. There are no drapes, no shades, and certainly no air conditioning. Just the brutal, merciless heat of the desert frying everything, including you, by morning. You're laying on a straw mat with a linen cover. That's more suggestion than protection. The Nile wind you were promised in all those travel documentaries. Yeah, it's gone. Probably perished somewhere around 800 BC. By the time you stagger outdoors, the temperature is already flirting with 90 F, or roughly 32 C. And it's not yet mid-AM. The sun doesn't merely shine in ancient Egypt. It affects your linen tunic, useless. It's like wearing tissue paper in a sauna. And don't even bother about sunscreen. There's no aloe vera, no SPF 50, not even a floppy hat with a logo from a beach resort. Ancient Egyptians did have protective oils, but whether you're affluent or work in a temple, you're not receiving any of it. Your greatest choice: slather yourself with mud or crocodile dung, which supposedly might keep you from turning into a human torch. Emphasis on May. By midday, the stones under your feet are hot enough to cook lentils. Shade is a luxury. Trees are scarce. You might find a little comfort hiding behind a mud brick wall. But even that wall is sweating by now. You, on the other hand, look like someone tossed you into a clay oven and forgot to set a timer. And you best not complain. Ra, the sun God, is watching, and in ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just whether it was heavenly authority. The hotter the day, the more powerful Ra was feeling. So, basically, if you're melting, it's a spiritual compliment. In short, surviving one day in ancient Egypt takes hydration, humility, and an unbreakable tolerance for feeling like a cooked bird. And this is simply the morning you're finally out of bed, or rather, off your uncomfortable straw mat. And the good news is the Nile is just a short walk away. The bad news, you can already smell it before you see it. Yes, the mighty Nile, the life-giver of ancient Egypt, venerated as sacred, the reason civilization here even exists. But let's be honest, it also smells like a fish market had a terrible breakup with. A swamp. The banks are swarming with flies, frogs, and animals that really shouldn't have legs. But do still, this is where you bathe. Soap hasn't been invented yet. And even if it had, you couldn't afford it. Instead, you bathe yourself in the freshest cleansing technology of the day, sand. That's right, exfoliation, the Egyptian way. Just wipe yourself down with gritty grains and call it skincare. It's like nature's sandpaper, but less effective. Washing clothing, also done in the Nile, and by washing, we mean banging them against rocks while praying that a crocodile doesn't mistake your laundry for a good noon snack. Oh, and just to make things more exciting, let's not forget the occasional sewage runoff from upstream. Remember, humans, cattle, and the occasional funeral boat all share this river, and yet somehow this is deemed clean. You scrub, rinse, and emerge feeling slightly less sticky and just marginally more frightened about leeches. If you're a city inhabitant in Memphis or Thieves, you might be lucky enough to use a public basin or a cistern, but for everyone else, it's Nile or nothing. And don't expect privacy. This is a public bathing spot frequented by families, neighbors, cattle, and the odd ibis pecking around your ankles like. It pays rent. Water jugs are filled and balanced on heads brought back to your mud brick house before the midday heat transforms the clay into toast. It's a daily ritual, spiritual, vital, slightly traumatic. So sure, the Nile is sacred, it feeds you, cleans you, and quenches your thirst. But let's not pretend it's a glittering oasis. In fact, it's half miracle, part biohazard. And all you've got by now, you've bathed in the crocodile-fested Nile. You've sandpapered yourself somewhat clean, and your body feels like a baked fig. Time for breakfast. The most crucial and least spectacular meal of your ancient Egyptian day. Let's set expectations. There are no eggs Benedict, no fruit platters, and absolutely no iced lattes. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is less of a gourmet event and more of a tactical refueling operation. You sit on a low stool, if you have one, or just crouch in the corner like everyone else. The focus of your dinner, bread, lots of it, dense, coarse, and frequently as chewy as a leather sandal. It's made from emma, wheat, or barley and cooked in clay ovens that may or may not be shared by the local rats. And don't be surprised if there's sand in your slice, not as a topping, merely an unwelcome component from the grinding. Stones, a daily dosage of minerals, you could say. Then comes the beer. But don't get thrilled. This isn't crisp, bubbly craft ale. This is thick, foggy, lukewarm, watery bread, more porridge than pint. It's filled with calories and vaguely fermented, a medieval smoothie with a faint scent of sour cereal and survival. Even children drink it, not to be edgy, but because it's safer than water. At least the brewing process boils off the parasites. Unlike the Nile, which we just discussed, is like a petri dish. If you're lucky, and we mean very lucky, you might get an onion or a couple dried dates to go with your carbon foam combo protein only. If someone caught a fish and didn't immediately eat it uncooked, and as you chew your rock-like loaf and sip your grain sludge, flies swirl around you like it's a smorgasbord, because it is for them. You swat at them with one hand, grasp your cup with the other, and try not to think too hard about the fact that this is likely the greatest meal you'll have today. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about flavor, it's about function. It fuels your body just enough to survive till the next time someone hands you another sand-filled block of bread bon appetit. You've had your gritty bread, your chunky beer, and just enough rest to call yourself functioning now. It's time to work, and trust me, ancient Egyptian labor makes current burnout look like a spa day. Unless you're a scribe, priest, or royalty, which, let's be honest, you're not. Your job is pure muscle and thus no air-conditioned cubicle, no coffee breaks, no ergonomic chairs, only sweat, sand, and a continual possibility of falling before noon. If you're a farmer, you'll be ankle-deep in Nile muck by morning, plucking weeds or planting barley under the supervision of an overseer whose pastime seems to be yelling you use wooden plows, rudimentary sickles, and your bare hands. If your back hurts, congratulations, that implies it's working. If you're a laborer, things get even more biblical. Imagine transporting multi-ton stones for temple construction under a hot sun while barefoot. Up-ramps composed of gravel and prayer. There's no ocean here. You trip, that's a shattered ankle and a shrug from the foreman. Working on tombs, that's another degree of grind. You're hammering limestone, chiseling out burial chambers for individuals who will get to rest longer than you ever will. And if you botch up a pharaoh's tomb, let's just say job security can involve a sealed chamber and a curse. And if you're a woman, you're not off the hook. Domestic work is also physical labor, grinding grain, carrying water, weaving linen, care for kids, and still assisting in the farms. Your break is when the baby naps for 7 minutes while you make dinner. You eat on the fly, you wipe sweat with your tunic. You keep pushing because slowing down means falling behind. And falling behind means someone else gets your grain quota and you get the blame. There's no clocking out. The sun is your supervisor. When it eventually falls beneath the horizon, you crawl home. Barely alive, dust caked and yearning of softer sandals and a less harsh sun god work in ancient Egypt isn't simply hard, it's infinite. It's a full-body commitment to survival, day after day. Until your body gives out, or your supervisor decides you're not worth feeding. And that's not even the worst of it. After sweating your soul out in the fields or a quarry, you might be tempted to moan. Maybe anything modest, a little, "This job stinks," or "Why am I doing this again?" Stop right there, because in ancient Egypt, whining isn't just frowned upon. It's potentially treason. Why? Because your employer isn't simply a ruler. He's an actual god. The Pharaoh isn't just a guy who got chosen or born into a lucky family. He's the human manifestation of Horus, son of Ra, chosen by the skies to rule over Egypt and maintain Maat, heavenly cosmic order, intact. In other words, if the river flows good this year, praise the Pharaoh. If it doesn't, well, maybe you didn't pray hard enough. Questioning his authority isn't just disrespectful, it's blasphemy speaking. Badly of him may get you a date with a whip, a set of chains, or an early trip to the underworld with none of your favorite burial goods. You see his face everywhere, on statues, temple walls, coins, even bread molds. His name is recited in ceremonies. His image is painted larger than everyone else's in every mural. That's not artistic exaggeration. That's law, and don't expect to ever see him. If you're a commoner, the closest you'll come is watching a golden bark float by during a religious festival. Blink, and he's gone back to a palace you'll never enter, surrounded by officials, guards, scribes, and enough gold to finance a small civilization, which, fun fact, he basically does. If you're lucky enough to work on a royal project like a tomb, a temple, or a statue the size of a mountain, you serve with heavenly delight. At least that's what the state says. You say it too, because saying you're honored to chisel stone for 14 hours a day is safer than the alternative. And don't even think of rebellion. Pharaohs smash revolutions faster than you can say. Dynasty just asked the last village that tried to withhold taxes. Oh wait, you can't. It no longer exists. So certainly, the Pharaoh is holy, and you're just lucky to be allowed to sweat in his name. Now, get back to work if you thought surviving under the heat was hard. Just wait till you understand that in ancient Egypt, sand is your roommate, co-worker, seasoning, and mortal enemy. It's everywhere, in your clothes, in your food, there. It's no escape it. You may be working, praying, sleeping, or minding your own business at the market. And suddenly, a gust of hot wind sweeps by and turns your face into a grainy exfoliation. Experiment you didn't ask for. Let's start with the clothes. You wear linen. It's light, breathable, and about as successful at keeping sand out as a screen door is at holding back soup. It glides down your tunic, clings to your skin, and somehow finds its way into places you didn't know had wrinkles eating. Good luck. Every loaf of bread is just a sand trap, since flour was pounded between stone slabs. Small amounts of grit made their way into the dough. Egyptians didn't only eat their wheat, they ate their millstones to its ancient tooth remnants, are typically worn flat like river rocks. Imagine digesting your meal while also submitting your mers every day. And if you thought your house was a sand-free zone, think again. Your mud brick home has gaps, cracks, and windows with no glass. Perfect. Apertures for wind-driven sand. Your floors are covered. Your cooking pans are filled. Your bed is basically a sandpit disguised as furniture. Shoes, optional at best. Most Egyptians walked barefoot, so you're always one step away from turning your feet into worn leather sandals. If you do have footwear, it's likely a plain pair of sandals, fashioned from reeds, fashionable, perhaps protective, not remotely. Then there are sandstorms, Egypt's version of a slap from the gods, sudden, swirling, blinding. One moment, you're talking to a friend. The next, you're spitting dust and feeling like someone emptied a whole beach into your eye sockets. Visibility decreases to nothing, and everyone around you turns into faintly coughing silhouettes in brief. Sand is the roommate who never leaves the spice in every meal and the silent adversary of your eyes, lungs, and dignity. It's not just the backdrop of your life, it's part of your body now, and no, you can't wash it off. You've already tried in the Nile, which is probably full of more sand. In ancient Egypt, religion isn't just a weekend activity. It's the operating system for everything. Your job, your nutrition, your hygiene regimen, your bedtime rituals, all dictated by gods who seem to have very definite opinions. First, comprehend this. The gods are everywhere. Your town has temples to a dozen different deities, each responsible for some crucial function. There's Ra, who pilots the sun around the sky like it's a heavenly Uber. These heads, God of wisdom, is in charge of scribes and lunar calendars. Sobek, half crocodile part, nightmare fuel, defends the Nile and Bastet. The cat goddess basically runs public relations. Forget personal freedom. Your daily routine relies around satisfying them. Wake up, thank Ra, spill some drink, apologize to Hathor, stub your toe, curse quietly, or risk drawing a spirit with a grudge. Before meals, you present a piece of food to the gods. Before bed, you pray that set god of chaos doesn't plunge your house into existential disorder. Overnight, even funerals are multi-day rituals where the deceased must pass exams, escape demons, and prove they were morally respectable or incur eternal erasure. Speaking of the afterlife, ancient Egyptians took it very seriously. You don't just die and move on, you must pass a judgment process involving your heart being weighed against a feather of truth. If your heart's heavier because of lies, cruelty, or maybe stealing someone's goat, you're eaten by a creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of your worst nightmares. So, even in death, you're still on probation. But here's the twist. This sophisticated belief system isn't gloomy. It's soothing. Egyptians believed life was part of a cosmic balance, and if you followed the procedures and upheld Mayat, the idea of truth, and order, you had a chance for a pleasant afterlife, complete with food, family, and maybe a boat. Of course, the richer you were, the more gods seemed to recognize you. Temples where vast priests were powerful and peasants, well, they simply hoped the gods were feeling kind that day, because in ancient Egypt, religion isn't optional. It's your work description, your insurance plan, and your trip schedule for the next life. So you've tripped on something sharp, got bit by something unusual, or caught something contagious, which in ancient Egypt is basically Tuesday time to seek medical attention. Just don't expect a waiting room or a sterile environment. You're going to be healed with a combination of spells, herbs, and pure optimism. First, you'll be escorted to a doctor, and to be fair, they were some of the most advanced in the ancient world. They possessed surgical equipment, medical texts, and a decent understanding of anatomy. But here's the catch: science in ancient Egypt usually came with a heavy dose of magic. You're handed a pus composed of honey, moldy bread, and crushed herbs. Honey, actually, is antibacterial, and mold has early penicillin characteristics, so it acts, sort of, but before administering it, the healer will recite a protective spell, just to be cautious, because you never know when your stomach problems are actually the consequence of a spiteful ghost or an angry god. Have a headache, you might receive a dose of crushed onions rubbed into your scalp while someone recites a hymn, too. Though let's put cow poo mixed with dates over your chest and see what happens. Infection time for a paste of lizard blood, ochre, and beer, plus a prayer, too. Horus surgery, it did happen sometimes. Abscesses were drained, bones were set, and wounds were patched with linen thread. But there's no anesthesia, just a sharp knife and a pal to hold your shoulders down while you scream into a mud brick. Cushioned dentistry, not great. Remember all the sand in the bread. Your teeth are worn down by your 20s. If one gets infected, your alternatives are 1. Survive with it, to die from it, or 3. Get it extracted with something resembling pliers, crafted by a blacksmith with low standards, and let's not forget the amulets. Whether you're giving birth, getting stitched up, or just sneezing too loud, a decent doctor, priest will definitely place a charm around your neck, just in case the underlying issue is an unseen serpent spirit twisted around your spleen. So yeah, Egyptian medicine had its moments, but generally, you'd better believe in the gods, since your band-aid is actually a prayer. Here's a plot twist. Most folks don't expect ancient Egyptian women enjoyed more rights than many women in later cultures. They may own property, operate businesses, suit for divorce, and even take a man to court. Sounds progressive, right? But before you pack your bags for a time-traying girl boss vacation holdup. Because while the legal status can amaze you, the day-to-day reality, not so glamorous. If you're a lady in ancient Egypt, you probably wake up before daybreak. You're grinding grain by hand with a big flat stone that chews into both wheat and your spine. Then it's off to fetch water from the Nile. Make breakfast, care for children, manage the family, feed animals, and, if needed, work in the fields. You're a one-woman workforce in linen. There's no me time, no spa days, and definitely no maternity leave. Childbirth is hazardous and painful. Midwives are helpful, definitely, but there are no epidurals, no disinfectant, and no push playlists featuring peaceful harps you give birth in. A heated room with incense prayers and hopefully not too much blood. Let's talk fashion. Linen dresses are light and breathable, but there's no underwear and no shoes. The sun scorches your skin, the sand grinds into everything, and the bugs believe. You're an all-you-can-eat buffet. Want makeup? Great Egyptian ladies did wear cosmetics, but it's lead-based and applied with sticks that look suspiciously like toothpicks. Now, if you're lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family, things are better. You might read, write, manage estate accounts, or become a priestess if you're born royal. You could even become Pharaoh like Hatshepsut, or Cleopatra, who ruled with brilliance and scary eyeliner. But if you're impoverished, your status may be legal. But your reality is physical. You work, sweat, bend bare, birthberry, and pray. You're not shackled by law, but by survival. Still, Egyptian women had agency, and that mattered. They could speak in court, preserve their inheritance, and didn't become property. When they married, compared to many ancient societies, it's tremendous. So certainly Egyptian women had rights, but comfort that's reserved for statues and deities. Not the woman elbow deep in dew while batting flies off a kid you made it through. Another tough day in ancient Egypt. You ate your gritty bread, lugged your buckets, escaped divine wrath, and maybe even dodged a sandstorm. Time to relax. Right, incorrect, because in ancient Egypt, your ultimate test occurs after you die. death isn't the end, it's just the beginning of an exceedingly bureaucratic, multi-faceted journey through the underworld. And if you thought the labor overseer was harsh, wait until you encounter the gods of judgment. First, your soul takes a voyage to the hall of Mayat, here before a tribunal of 42 deities. You must assert your innocence in what's basically the oldest court deposition in history. You state stuff like I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not covet my neighbor's donkey, all while hoping the gods buy it. Then comes the heart test. Literally, your heart, regarded to be the seat of the soul, is placed on a scale opposing the feather of Mayat, the emblem of truth, justice, and balance. If your heart is heavier than the feather, well, it signifies you've led a wicked life. Enter a mid-part, lion, part crocodile, part hippo. All frightening, she doesn't find you. She consumes your soul, destroying it forever. No afterlife, no afterlife, no second chances, just permanent non-existence, which, in a civilization preoccupied with eternity, is the greatest punishment. And it gets better. You can condemn yourself not simply by actions, but by words. One false confession, one forgotten line during your judgment, and boom, spiritual obliteration. It's like an open book test, where failure means getting devoured by a fabled death hybrid. If you do pass, congratulations, you get to enter the field of reeds, a calm, idealized version of Egypt, where your soul lives eternally with boats, with crops, with family, and perhaps with less sand fleas, but the stakes tremendous. That's why Egyptians fussed about tomb preparation, funeral rites, and magical writings like the Book of the Dead, a spiritual cheat sheet full of prayers, spells, and helpful instructions like don't insult the crocodile god. So, the afterlife might be nice, but only if you spend your life very properly. One swear word, one unpaid temple tax, and your next stop is lunch for a meat. Sleep tight if there's one small. Kindness in ancient Egypt, it's this linen, blessed, breathable linen. Your entire clothing and everyone else's is fashioned from this plant-based fabric. It's light, cool, and helps your skin breathe in the blazing heat. That's the good news. The bad news, that's pretty much where the comfort ends. Whether you're a farmer, builder, priest, or vendor, you're wearing the same costume every day. For men, a short white kilt or loin. Cloth for ladies, a straight, sleeveless linen dress, sometimes held up by straps, sometimes not. If you're upper class, you might have pleat or beads or elaborate patterns. If you're not, it's plain white or slightly grayish, depending on how long it's been since wash day. Oh, and wash day, your hand cleaning your clothes. In the Nile, while hoping a hippo doesn't appear, midar. Most people go barefoot. Sandals fashioned from woven reeds or leather are designated for rare events or temple priests. So, unless you're royalty, expect to spend your days with hot sand between your toes and probably a sharp rock in your heel. Accessories, completely but primarily functional amulets for protection necklaces to display. Status and eye makeup made from powdered coal, which wasn't just for fashion, it helped minimize brightness from the sun and purportedly warded off diseases. Yes, even eyeliner had a profession in ancient Egypt. But no matter how nicely you dress, the bugs don't care. Flies, gnats, mosquitoes, they consider your breezy attire as an invitation. You're walking through the day, swatting continuously, wiping on fragrant oils, and praying that your linen doesn't adhere to you like a wet curtain the moment the sun reaches full strength. And of course, your attire doesn't change with the seasons because Egypt doesn't actually have seasons, only hot and slightly less hot. So your linen ensemble is effectively your year-round uniform, whether it's 110 or a chilly 70 evening. So yeah, Egyptian attire was light, exquisite, and far more comfortable than what Romans would wear later. But don't let the airy ensembles deceive you, because no matter how light your tunic feels, your life is still heavy with labor, heat, sand, and mosquitoes that refuse to respect your personal space. You've survived another sweltering Egyptian day, lugging bricks, dodging sandstorms, and praying your linen doesn't dissolve mid-work. But in ancient Egypt, survival is always temporary, because no matter how tough you are, you probably won't live past 35. Let's break it down. If you make it past childhood, which is itself an achievement, considering infant death rates were sky high, you're thrown directly into adulthood. By age 13, marriage work and child rearing all start early because honestly, you're running out of time. You might die from heat stroke, or an infected cut, or childbirth, or crocodiles, or scorpion stings, or lousy bread, and ignore antibiotics. If you acquire a fever, the greatest therapy is honey herbs and hoping the gods don't have other plans for your soul. But here's the twist. Egyptians weren't terrified of death. They planned for it. In fact, they planned for it better than most people plan for retirement today. If you're rich, you commission a tomb, the ancient counterpart of a 5-star eternal suite. You start saving up grave goods, jewels, food offerings, perfumed sculptures, even miniature servant dolls called shabuptis to perform your tasks in the afterlife. Think of them like spiritual interns who work while you slumber. Eternally, your body is embalmed, wrapped in linen, packed with pure natural salt, and put nicely into a decorated sarcophagus. You're buried with a copy of the dead, which is less about doom, and more like a mystical trip guide packed with passwords for the afterlife spells to fool demons and tips for not getting eaten by soul-devouring monsters. If you're poor, well, your tomb is likely a shallow trench in the sand. Your body is covered in whatever fabric your family can spare, maybe a pot or two placed nearby and then covered with earth. No paintings, no golden mask, just you and the wind. But even the poorest Egyptians clung on to the dream of the afterlife, a beautiful, fertile paradise called the field, of reeds where you farm without work, eat without hunger, and ride the Nile forever under lovely sunlight. So yes, you'll probably die young in ancient E. But if you lived well, prayed well, and didn't insult too many jackal-headed gods, you just may spend eternity in style. You finally made it to the afterlife, or at least into the tomb. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, right? Well, not quite, because in ancient Egypt, even the dead got plundered. Let's start with a simple reality. Tombs are filled of costly good, gold, amulets, jewelry, fragrant oils, sculpted sculptures, chests full of linens, and for pharaohs, literal boatloads of treasure, all intended to be transported into the afterlife. But treasure in a tomb is simply an open invitation for someone with a chisel and bad intentions. Tomb robbing was so widespread that it became a full-time problem. Pharaohs tried to prevent it by hiding their tombs deep in cliffs, sealing them behind trapdoors, and scrawling dreadful curses on the walls. Things like, may a crocodile devour your soul, or may your limbs be twisted forever by a serpent made of fire. Spoiler, the curses didn't work. Grave robbers came somehow at night in secret with inside information. Sometimes they were corrupt laborers who helped build the tombs. In other situations, even priests and guards were in on it. And the punishment for getting caught, severe: think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. But considering how expensive tomb treasures were, especially cash and exotic incense, the risk frequently felt worth it. After all, the dead don't fight back. But it's not just the wealthy that got plundered. Even commoners' graves were disrupted. Poorer Egyptians would have been buried with a little jug of beer or a piece of bread for the afterlife that was still worth stealing. Food was sparse, tools were valued, and linen was cash. The irony. Tomb robbing wasn't simply for money. Sometimes it was about survival. Egypt suffered, endured famines, political collapse, and invasions. A hungry worker might sneak into a tomb, not for treasure, but for food. And when your children are starving, a few funeral offerings look less like sacred artifacts and more like dinner. So in ancient Egypt, you're not protected just because you're dead. Your tomb can be stolen, your name erased, and your mummy unwrapped by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and low moral judgment. Rest in peace. Only if no one knows where you're buried. We've all seen them, those beautiful mystery designs on the walls of temples and tombs. Birds, eyes, snakes, lotus flowers, men walking sideways like they're on a fashion runway. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, visually amazing and terribly difficult to learn. Sure, they seem cool, but try reading them. Hieroglyphs weren't only beautiful art, they were a full-blown writing system with over 700 characters and expanding. Some symbols represent full words, others are noises, and many are determinatives, which clarify meaning, because you know writing the word star with a real star sign could be too clear, and don't anticipate spaces or punctuation. Ancient Egyptian writing was just one long, gorgeous riddle with artistic flair, zero vowels, and a deep need for context. Oh, and it can be written left to right, right to left, or top to bottom, depending on what the scribe feels like that day. The trick glance at which way the birds or people are facing. That's your reading direction. If they're facing right, read right. Faced left, read left. And if they're upside down, good luck. Learning to write hieroglyphs wasn't for commoners. Literacy was scarce. Maybe 1% of the population could truly read and write. If you wanted, you had to become a scribe, which entailed years of hard instruction, starting as a child. You'd remember hundreds of symbols, duplicate endless scrolls, and practice so much that your hand probably curled like a claw by age 15. But the payout hue scribes were esteemed wealthed and never required to haul bricks under the sun. Instead, they penned tax records, court documents, letters, and religious texts. They were essential to society and sheltered from most manual labor in a world where writing was power. Scribes ruled silently from the shadows for the rest of the populace, though. Writing was something wonderful. Literally, hieroglyphs were considered to hold sacred power. Writing someone's name safeguarded their soul, erasing it, ultimate spiritual annihilation. So yeah, spelling actually matters. So while hieroglyphs may look like ancient emoji, they're more like a linguistic Rubik's Cube wrapped in myth, math, and mystery. Beautiful. Yes. Easy to learn. Absolutely not. After 14 chapters of heat, starvation, sand, superstition, and backbreaking effort, it's time to ask the big question. Would you live a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest, probably not sure. It's simple to romanticize the old world. Golden tombs, lotus, scented, air elegance, gods with animal heads, and a thing for order and beauty. But beneath the iconic monuments and breathtaking art was a world of cruel reality that spared no one but the elite, your average. Egyptian day started with a dirt floor, a cloud of flies, and the knowledge that if you didn't work, you didn't eat, you walked barefoot. On hot, sand-hauled water cooked over open fires lived, shoulder to shoulder with bugs, smoke, and livestock. You worried about sickness, divine punishment, and whether a snake may creep into your sleeping mat. You had no toothpaste, no medicine, no retirement plan, and if you were lucky, maybe 2 changes of linen. You served a god king who could seize your land with a decree, a climate that fried your skin by midday, and a religion that needed you to pass a literal divine exam after death merely to enter into the nice version of the afterlife. Let's also not forget the things you didn't have. No antibiotics, no sunscreen, no privacy, no plumbing, no medications, and no simple getaway. Once you were born into your class, that was it. No promotions, no career changes, no finding oneself. You were either a scribe, a farmer, a laborer, a mother, a servant, or dead. And yet, for all this, the ancient Egyptians weren't miserable. They believed the ideal, their purpose, and the beauty of life they loved. Music, dance, food, family, and festivals. They joked, they painted, they saw eternity with enough clarity to build stone monuments that still stand today. But for a modern person, without your air conditioning, your filtered water, your Advil, your sneakers, and your smartphone, you'd fold before the second sandstorm hit. So no, you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt. But that's good, because they lasted thousands of years, and maybe, just maybe, that's why we still talk about them in the midst of old. Teoti, Waken One Pyramid, refuses to be forgotten. Its surface is covered not with serene symbols of religion or loving gods, but with snarling, open-mouthed stone serpents, hundreds of them. They stick out from the temple's front as if frozen in mid-strike teeth, bared eyes, wide. This is the temple of the feathered serpent, known to many as the temple of Quetzalcoatl. But unlike most temples that grasp for the sky with devotion, this one feels different. It feels predatory from the time you approach it. There's an uncanny sense that you're being watched. The stone snake heads aren't plain ornament. They were warnings, emblems of divine wrath. And beneath their eyes, something awful once unfolded. Excavations throughout the previous few decades have discovered something that archaeologists didn't expect hidden beneath the temple's base were not only ceremonial offerings, but something considerably more unsettling: human remains, and not a handful over 200 bodies. Many of them decapitated hands bound behind their backs. Young guys, warriors, perhaps buried in groups, religious sacrifices, organized with precise precision. Some were buried with obsidian knives at their sides, others with necklaces made of human teeth or jewelry carved from jawbones. They weren't simply dumped into the ground. They were strategically put in areas of significance. It's apparent this was no mass grave. It was a message, a divine transaction inscribed into stone and sealed with blood. But what type of belief system justifies such brutality? Who requested so many lives be sacrificed at once? The temple of the fathered serpent wasn't just a religious temple. It was a theater of power, a site where rulers united cosmology, warfare, and fear to keep control over a city of coal. More than 100 inhabitants, and this ritual bloodletting may have been the cost of keeping the cosmos in balance. As you stand before this temple today, gazing at those stone serpents, you're not just looking at art or architecture, you're looking into the eyes of a civilization that believed the gods needed blood and that they had every right to deliver it. But who were these people who commanded such violence and vanished without a trace? The answer lies in the shadows of Teotihuacan before the magnificent Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved their cosmic calendar into stone. There stood a metropolis unlike any other in the ancient Americas, Teotihuacan. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the location where gods were born. And when you traverse its immense avenue of the dead, surrounded by pyramids that scrape the heavens, you start to understand why. At its height, about 100 to 250 CE, Teotihuacan was a huge city of over 100 people, making it one of the largest towns in the world at the time, rivaling ancient Rome, Alexandria, and Chang'an in size and influence. It was a city painstakingly constructed, large boulevards, graded streets, apartment blocks, housing extended, families, multi-story constructions fashioned from volcanic stone. And at the heart of it, all three gigantic pyramids: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Sun, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. But here's what makes Teotihuacan different. No one knows who built it seriously. To this day, we don't know the name of the folks who developed this site. We don't even know what they called themselves. There are no written records, no kings' names engraved into stone. Teotihuacan seems to have been a society ruled not by a single ruler, but rather by a council, a theocracy, or something completely strange to our concept of ancient power. And despite this invisibility, their influence of Teotihuacan's dominance has been uncovered hundreds of miles away from the Maya cities of Tukal and Copan to the remote Zaput capital of Monte Alban. Obsidian blades, ceramic designs, murals, and even political meddling. In one case, Teotihuacan emissaries may have helped overthrow a local Maya king to install a ruler more favorable to their interests. But how did they maintain such a vast network? How did a city with no known writing system command such authority across Mesoamerica? The answer may lie in how they combined cosmic ideology with statecraft. Their temples were more than places of worship. They were tools of control, aligning perfectly with astronomical events, serving as theaters of ritual sacrifice, and reminding every citizen and every visitor that Teotihuacan was no ordinary city. It was the axis of the world, a sacred engine that kept time, fate, and blood flowing in sync. And at the heart of it all stood the temple of the feathered serpent. To understand the deity, it was dedicated to the feathered serpent, known later by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, and to the Maya as Culcan. This figure is one of the most enigmatic gods in all of Mesoamerican mythology. But in Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs rose to power, the feathered serpent was already a central, possibly supreme, divine force. But here's the paradox. What type of god is both a serpent and a bird? Think about that. Serpents crawl across the underworld. They lose their skin, indicating rebirth. Dualism and death birds soar high in the sky, closer to the sun, indicating freedom, divinity, and life-giving wind. To mix these two, earth-bound and sky-dwelling, death and order, was to produce something entirely cosmic, something terrifyingly strong. The feathered serpent wasn't just a divinity. He was a bridge between worlds. On the exterior of the temple, etched in great relief, we observe hundreds of his images. Goggle eyes, bared teeth, plumed headdresses. Some historians believe these represent the god himself. Others suggest they're soldiers or priestly figures decked in divine attire to signal their power. Either way, they are ubiquitous. The temple is covered in these snake-bird hybrids, as if the structure itself breathed with divine presence. But the feathered serpent wasn't just a god of the heavens. He was intimately tied to sacrifice. Blood was the fuel that kept the cosmos in motion. And Quetzalcoatl, though later remembered as a gentle, civilizing deity, had a much darker role in Teotihuacan. He demanded offerings, and not just of maize or incense, but of life itself. In some myths, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of the dead and create humankind, but to create life from death. There had to be a deal the gods gave themselves for humanity, and people, in return, were supposed to do the same. The temple of the feathered serpent wasn't just a monument to faith, it was a cosmic machine created to link the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. Through ceremony, every stone, every serpent's head, every buried victim fed into that system. Teotihuacan didn't only worship the feathered serpent. They embodied his logic, conundrum, power, and blood. And the most terrible secrets were concealed beneath the surface for generations. The temple of the feathered serpent stood silently, a worn, magnificent monument, almost buried by time. Locals whispered legends, scholars made estimates, but no one could have guessed what was buried beneath its stratified stones until archaeologists broke through in the late 1980s and early 2000s. What they found wasn't just unexpected, it was uncomfortable. Hidden beneath the temple's foundations were a series of lengthy, walled tunnels and pits, each filled with carefully placed human remains. These weren't the messy aftermath of war or disease. These were purposeful sacrifices. Systematic, ritualistic code, the fatalities totaling over 200 were young men, many between 15 and 25 some. Wore necklaces made of human jawbones. Others had their hands bound behind their backs. A few were decapitated. Obsidian blades, sharp and dark as night, were scattered nearby. The unmistakable tools of ritual slaughter. And this is where it gets darker. The arrangement of the bodies followed geometric and symbolic patterns. They weren't buried haphazardly. They were positioned in quadrants. Cardinal directions, probably to mirror the universe. Even the number of bodies mattered. It wasn't simply about death. It was about meaningful death offerings surrounding the victim's jaguar bones, serpents, exotic shells from the faraway Gulf, coast figurines, and obsidian blades that had never been used in war. This wasn't punishment, it was a gift. These young guys, most likely soldiers, had been selected not to die in disgrace, but to die as part of something transcendent. To the Teotihuacanos, the very act of erecting a temple may have necessitated human sacrifice. It was as if every stone had to be consecrated with blood. Every layer raised only after an offering had been made. The deeper you dig, the more sacrifice you find in one room. Scientists uncovered complex tunnels filled with mercury and mica, elements connected with the underworld. The floor glimmered. Like water, was this a symbolic path to the country of the dead, a mirror of the night sky? The more they excavated, the more it felt like the temple was not built on top of death, but created to encapsulate it. The blood didn't stain the stone by accident. The stone was designed to hold the blood, and all of it was for the gods. Look closer at the temple of the feathered serpent, and you'll see something unusual, something unnerving. It doesn't merely rest on the landscape, it aligns with the universe. Teotihuacan wasn't built randomly. The entire city was set out along accurate cosmic axis. Its principal avenue of the dead travels at a 15 angle off true north. Not a mistake, but an intentional change, possibly to correspond with a setting of the Pleiad star cluster or the sun on specified ritual days. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sits right along this road, tying it into a great heavenly pattern. But why? What were they seeking to line with? Archaeologists and our coasters have argued this for decades. Some claim the temple lines up with the equinox sunrise. Others think it ties to Venus, the planet most important to Mesoamerican civilizations, typically associated with battle, sacrifice, and rebirth when Venus rose. Or set conflicts were declared offerings made and temples activated with ritual fire. Even the temple's size seem purposeful. The repetition of the number 7, the number of observable planetary bodies, appears in its step phases, their symmetry, rhythm, and a wonderful mastery of both earthly math and cosmic cycles. And beneath the surface, more clues. In 2003, archaeologists unearthed a tunnel beneath the temple, not a rough tube, but a meticulously planned subterranean universe. The walls were formerly covered in powdered pite, a shimmering mineral that would have reflected light like starlight. Combined with mercury pools and microlined walls, the tunnel seemed designed to imitate the cosmos itself. To go through it would be like journeying through the Milky Way, a metaphorical voyage to the underworld, or even to rebirth. Was this temple not merely a place of sacrifice, but a cosmic machine, a doorway that aligned Earth's sky and the spirit realm? Some experts claim Teoti interpreted time as round, not linear. Every ritual, every building, every sacrifice wasn't a one-time event. It was part of an everlasting cycle. Death, linking to rejuvenation, sacrifice, fueling rebirth. The temple's alignments may have helped foresee celestial motions, coordinate crops, and more significantly schedule when to sacrifice blood. The temple of the feathered serpent wasn't simply looking at the stars. It was trying to speak to them. The temple of the feathered serpent wasn't just a spiritual beacon, it was a political weapon. Its very appearance was supposed to overwhelm, to terrify, to remind every observer, local or international, who controlled the reins of power in Teotihuacan. Imagine standing in its shadow. 800 years ago, you, a visitor from a smaller city-state, would arrive at the Avenue of the Dead, already Eric by the sheer magnitude of Teotihuacan. But as you approached the temple of the feathered serpent, you'd freeze. The serpent heads glare at you. With teeth bared jaguar symbols snarl from the stone, the plaza ahead formerly held enormous gatherings, not simply for festivity, but for public ceremony. You might even witness a sacrifice, the governing class of Teotihuacan, walking, realized something. Vital terror is power, and nothing stirs terror like divine wrath by organizing ceremonial executions in broad daylight surrounded by cosmic symbols and death. Imagery, they transmitted a clear message. The gods are with us, and we are not afraid. To feed them, but this wasn't pandemonium, this was theater. Priests with feathered headdresses and obsidian masks would chant, dance, and pour blood, turning cosmic myth into political performance. It wasn't just about pleasing the gods. It was about reminding everyone watching that the city's rulers had direct access to the divine. They alone could open the heavens, or bring rain, protect the people, or slay their foes. Even the architecture helped promote this propaganda from the temple's upper levels. Leaders could gaze down upon the plaza they controlled, not merely the narrative, but the very physical location in which it unfolded. The people gazed up at the gods, at the rulers, at the sacrifices, and recognized their place. And for foreigners, Teotihuacan didn't need to conquer with swords. It conquered with symbols. Visiting dignitaries would carry home tales of astonishment and dread. They would tell of the winged serpents, the countless passageways, the blood ceremonies that lighted the sky crimson in a society where gods governed via fear. Teotihuacan positioned itself as their chosen spokesman, and the temple of the feathered serpent was the loudest voice of all. At its heyday, Teotihuacan was the heartbeat of Mesoamerica, a city of fire and stone, of gods and blood, a city that appeared destined to exist forever. But around the year 550 CE, something changed, something snapped, and the silence that followed was as terrifying as the temple's stone serpent heads the fall of Teotihuacan was not loud and glorious. It was slow. Then sudden signs of strain began showing decades ago. Signs that the cosmic engine was faltering. Evidence points to a long period of drought, crop failure, and civil upheaval. The very structures that had sustained this vast city, centralized power, religious dominance, cosmic order, began to crumble under pressure. And then came the flames. Archaeologists have unearthed broad fire layers across elite compounds, temples, and administrative structures, including traces of savage damage at the temple of the feathered serpent. What's remarkable is that the lower-ras residential areas were mostly untouched. This wasn't an external invasion. This was a revolt, a rebellion, maybe from inside the very people who had viewed sacrifices in awe, may have rebelled against their priest-kings. The temple of the feathered serpent, once a symbol of divine authority, was ransacked. Sculptures were defaced. Fires were set, ritual areas were desecrated, and then stillness. Teotihuacan wasn't fully abandoned overnight, yet it lost its spirit. Trade networks collapsed, artistic production ceased, the major rites stopped, the ruling elite disappeared. The temple no longer spoke, and yet the enigma only intensified. Because as the city disappeared, its memory survived. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon its ruins. They were Aruk. They believed gods had built this area. They dubbed it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They built their own mythology around its pyramids, revering it as sacred ground, even as they had no idea who its original builders were. To them, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was not a ruin, it was a monument of heavenly truth. But the irony persists. The most powerful metropolis of its time, based on cosmic order and blood, went without a recorded word, without a final record, leaving behind just stone and questions. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet for nearly 1,000 years. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent lay buried behind layers of dust, volcanic ash, and quiet locals avoided it. Farmers tilled around it, and the world forgot it until the modern age of archaeology arrived and ripped out the truths buried beneath. Its heart. In the early 20th century, Mexican archaeologists began excavating. Teotihuacan wakened. What they found was stunning. A finely built metropolis considerably older than the Aztecs. But it wasn't until the 1980s and 2000s that the temple itself began to give its most intimate and most horrifying insights. One of the most startling findings happened in 2011 when researchers unearthed a sealed passage beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been purposely closed off approximately 100 to 800 years before, as if to prevent anyone from entering ever again. After years of investigation, scientists uncovered a cosmic corridor, a symbolic underworld lined with pie to simulate a starry sky, pools of liquid mercury, and thousands of ritual objects. Jade, statues, rubber balls, obsidian swords, and even carved wooden masks. It felt less like a mausoleum and more like a message. Why did the ancient builders go to such great? What were they trying to preserve or hide? Some researchers believe the tunnel was utilized in initiation rituals. Others think it signified the beginning of the universe, a mythological womb where gods were born, where rulers were produced, where divine order was negotiated between people and the cosmos. The mercury, formerly thought to be purely harmful, may have represented water or the fluid veil between worlds, and among all these sparkling bits was one persistent murmur. The feathered serpent, nevertheless, survived not just as a myth, but as a presence in murals, in carvings, in the geometry of the temple itself. The serpent hadn't disappeared. It had coiled inward, deep into the bones of the city, waiting to be rediscovered, and with each excavation, each uncovered jawbone or golden adornment, we move a bit closer to its message, one engraved not in language, but in stone sacrifice and darkness modern science has given. Us extras, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. But even with all our tools, one truth remains. The temple still holds secrets today. The temple of the fathered. Serpent stands as a disturbing memorial, not merely to a culture long gone, but to a way of thought that united power, cosmology, and death into one impenetrable system. Tourists snap photos, children run by the stone serpent heads, yet the dirt beneath their feet is steeped in 1,000 unknown legends and over 200 known human sacrifices. And still, the temple remains. Its legacy is not merely architectural. It's psychological, spiritual, cultural. The feathered serpent, this paradoxical god of sky and ground, continued to evolve. He would be adopted by the Toltecs, then reincarnated by the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, where his tale took on a kinder tone, the bringer of wisdom, the deity who cried for humanity, the one who pledged to return. This recreation of the snake god shows how myths don't die, they transform even in modern Mexico. Remnants of the feathered snake persist in art, in murals, in literature, and in national identity. The temple's picture has featured on coins, stamps, and even government buildings. It has become a symbol of mystery, of pre-Columbian splendor, and of the untamed spiritual realm that once surged through Mesoamerica. But there's another legacy, one less obvious, more uncomfortable. The temple of the fathered serpent compels us to confront the price of belief. It tackles challenging questions. How far would humans go to feel connected to the divine? What happens when power and religion become indistinguishable? Can beauty live with terror? In many ways, the temple isn't merely a historical landmark. It's a mirror, a reflection of us, our preoccupation with life after death, our yearning for significance, our power to build monuments of breathtaking beauty and to stain them with blood. The temple shows us that greatness comes with shadows, that civilizations can climb to unfathomable heights while bearing their secrets beneath the stones, and maybe that's why we keep returning. Not merely to visit, but to learn, because deep down we know the serpent is still watching, not to hit, but to remind. Remind us of what we once were and what we yet may be. Before we spoke in words, we spoke in rhythm tens of thousands of years ago. Long before the development of writing, even before the birth of language itself, early humans began to make something that could only be characterized as sound, with intention, not speech, not melody, but rhythm, a hand slapping hollow bark, a stick tapping a stone, a foot stamping earth in time. Somewhere in that ancient repetition, something beautiful. It wasn't labeled anything, but it seemed like something like communication, like movement, like emotion taking form. Anthropologists have unearthed evidence of early percussion instruments reaching back over 30. 0 years, these were likely manufactured from natural materials, tree trunks, hollowed out gourds, stretched animal hides. Nothing fancy, nothing preserved, but these primitive drums were not toys or idle distractions. They performed real functions, too. Worn to summon, to connect, imagine, a tribe scattered throughout a vast forest, one beat from a distant drum, and others sensed danger is coming. Maybe a party has begun. Maybe a gods are listening. The first drums weren't just tools. They were extensions of the human body, a heartbeat externalized, a pulse that could be felt across a valley. Drumming wasn't something you observed or listened to. It was something you participated in together around fires and tunnels where echoes made. The air itself quivered. These ancient rhythms became a language of emotion. Joy, grief, warning, hope, all expressed not in syllables or symbols, but in patterned sound. Before the first flutes were carved, before string instruments were dreamed of, the drum was already alive, anchoring us in time, giving shape to ritual and uniting individuals into tribes. In that way, the drum became humanity's first instrument, and arguably its first sign of group identification, no matter where on earth people lived. They made something to strike something, to beat anything, to mark the occasion, because even when we had no words, we had rhythm, and that beat was all. In the beginning of early human civilization, drums were not merely instruments, they were holy. Voices. Every tribe, every civilization, every corner of the planet evolved its own beat. But the intention was practically universal, to commune with the unseen. In Africa, where some of the world's earliest drums developed, rhythm was profoundly connected with life, death, and ancestry. The gam cut from a single wood and wrapped in goat leather was believed to hold 3 souls. That of the tree, it was carved from the animal whose skin gave it voice, and the craftsman who brought it to life played. In circles, the jewel didn't merely accompany rituals, it was the rite. Then there were the talking drums, capable of simulating human speech through pitch and tone in West Africa. These drums transported messages across miles, sending news warnings, births and deaths from one community to the next long before the telephone humans were already pounding their messages through the terrain. Across the oceans, Native American tribes saw the drum as a living entity. It was the heartbeat of Mother Earth, played in ceremonies to honor ancestors, call healing, or guide the souls of the dead. The huge, tall, wow drum, played by a circle of drummers, was both a musical and spiritual engine, a collective pulse that aligned humanity with nature and spirit. In Australia, the Aboriginal people employed clapsticks and percussion stomps in the sacred dream period, a fabled era of creation. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans struck frame drums to enter trance states, seeking visions or connecting with spirits. During long, dark winters, these weren't shows. These were acts of survival, healing storytelling, and connection to drum was to remember. To drum was to belong, and always it was communal drums synchronizing hearts and intentions. No sheet music, no stage, just people, moving hands, hitting souls, stirring, all linked by rhythm. It didn't matter where on earth you stood if you heard a drum in the distance. You knew something sacred was happening, something that words alone could never explain. From sacred circles to terrible battles, the drum has always spoken. Sometimes with comfort and sometimes with authority. As human communities progressed into kingdoms and empires, converted into tools of domination, devices of order and weapons of dread, the early troops didn't have radios or megaphones. They had drums. In ancient China, huge drums called bo were hammered to coordinate troops across vast terrains. With a single resonant boom, commanders could signal a charging retreat or flanking maneuver. These drums weren't just loud. They were purposeful. Each rhythm represented something distinct, and skilled warriors knew how to listen even during the chaos of warfare. In Mesopotamia, temple drums were used to announce rulers and summon the public, but in times of conflict, they resonated through city walls, intimidating adversaries with a deep, persistent thunder. It wasn't just percussion, it was psychological warfare. When the Romans marched, they brought with them the tympanum, a framed drum used in processions and by cults. Like that of Siebel, though not a battlefield instrument in the way horns and standards were, it carried symbolic power, a sound of empire, discipline, and order. But no army wielded drums. Quite like the Ottomans, their Medap bands, the world's first documented military orchestras, unleashed a tremendous storm of drums, cymbals, and horns before battles. The incessant beating of huge kettle drums and double-headed bass. Drums struck terror into the hearts of hostile forces. Some European sources describe soldiers pausing in dread before even seeing the Ottomans, stunned by sound drums, also enforced power off the battlefield. In royal palaces spanning Asia, Africa, and Europe, drum ensembles announced arrivals, marked coronations, and underlined political rights. To beat a drum was to signal power is present. Even enslaved people in the Americas utilized drums as means of resistance on plantations. Rhythmic communication kept culture alive and helped arrange secret rebellions. The drum, even under oppression, refuses to be silenced. So, whether it indicated divine right, military discipline, or naked dread, the drum has always held a message. This is who controls. This is who marches, and this is the cadence of power as civilizations fanned out across continents. So too did their rhythms, developing in shape, purpose, and philosophy. In the East, drums become implements of precision, spirituality, and ceremony. In the West, they leaned on military power and eventually orchestral grandeur. Two universes, two roots, one heartbeat. In India, the drum became a sacred instrument of heavenly language. The tabla, with its crisp tones and fluid grace, was utilized in classical music and devotional performances. But it was more than accompaniment. It was a discourse. Each stroke had a name, a meaning, a syllabic identity. Indian drumming wasn't merely percussive. It was spoken poetry, trained over decades. The table player was not merely a musician. He was a linguist of rhythm. In Japan, the Tao drum originated as a ceremonial behemoth played in Shinto rituals, theater, and combat. Tao demanded not just technical mastery, but physical discipline. The drummers moved with amazing precision, their stances anchored like warriors. In festivals, the booming Tao echoed through mountain valleys, thought to drive away evil spirits and call the gods down to earth. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flows of gamelan orchestras, guiding dancers in sacred temple ceremonies. These rhythms were stacked, interwoven, and heavenly, a sound depiction of cosmic harmony across the world. In Europe, drums had a different story. They were mostly utilitarian throughout the medieval period, alerting soldiers, measuring time, maintaining discipline. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque ages that drums began to enter formal music. Even then, they were placed in the background, tony, roaring beneath royal fanfare, or resonating in vast cathedrals. In this divergence, you see two philosophies. The East saw rhythm as art and spirit, something related to breath, chant, and meditation. The West saw it as structure and force, a tool to motivate, march, and measure. But both grasped the drum's core power to sculpt time, to dictate pace, to elevate ritual, to connect humans in ways that transcend language. East or west, holy or strategic, the drum remained. Essential, always listening, always speaking, from mountainside temples to jungle clearings, from desert fires to candle-lighted. Cathedrals' drums have always had a place where the human meets the divine, long before organized religion took hold. Rhythm was already a sacred language, a way to pray, to call, to transcend in Africa. Drums were not merely instruments, but were mystical entities in Yoruba traditions. For example, the batar drum was used to speak with the Orishas, gods, and ancestor spirits. Drummers weren't performers, they were monks. The beats they played were encoded prayers, urging the gods to descend and dance. Among the living, each pattern has a purpose, each beat a direction. In Hinduism, the drum appears even in the hands of gods. The deity Shiva, in his guise as Nataraja, dances the cosmic dance with a little hourglass-shaped drum in hand. The damaro, its rhythm signifies the heartbeat of the universe itself. From silence to sound, from void to shape, the drum is a holy heartbeat in Buddhism. The ritual frame drum is used in monastic chants and meditation ceremonies. Its gentle, soft strikes direct breath and consciousness, working like a metronome for the soul. It's not loud, it's not aggressive. It just reminds the practitioner to return again and again to the present moment. Across the Americas, traditional groups utilize drums in vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing ceremonies. The beat is constant, steady, imitating the rhythm of the womb, allowing individuals reach trance states or communicate with ancestor spirits in these locations. The drum doesn't just accompany prayer, it is the prayer. Even within Christianity, when rhythm was sometimes suppressed, the drum nonetheless found a hallowed place. In gospel traditions, particularly in African American churches, drums became a means of praise and power, a heartbeat behind voices lifted in devotion, a reminder of struggle, hope, and divine rhythm in every life. No matter the faith, the ritual, or the god invoked, the drum has been there, not as decoration, but as a vessel for energy, intention, and the mysteries we cannot speak, because when words fail in worship, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For thousands of years, drums were solitary instruments. One body, one sound, one mission. But in the heart of the industrial age, something remarkable happened. In factories, streets, and music halls, percussion was redesigned. And by the early 20th century, multiple drums were no longer spread over a stage. They were combined, making something altogether new. The drum kit, it was born out of necessity. In the late 1800s, military and theater bands required numerous percussionists to play bass, drum, snare, cymbals, and woodlocks, each handled by a different individual, but space was short and budgets were tighter, so drummers began to mix instruments into a single playable arrangement. By 1909, the first bass drum pedal was patented. A drummer may now beat a large drum with one foot, allowing their hands to accomplish more. Added hi-hats, toms, cowbells, and ride cymbals, producing a system that could resemble a whole percussion section, all from one seat. What emerged was more than a tool. It was a drummer's throne. And then came jazz in smoky clubs and underground dance halls of New Orleans and Chicago. The drum kit erupted into life. Jazz drummers didn't just keep time. They played the kit like a voice with syncopation swing and sensitivity. Legends like Gene Kruger and Buddy Rich converted the drum kit into a lead instrument. Rhythm became storytelling. As jazz evolved into rock, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, more powerful. The 1960s and 70s saw kits develop with several toms, splash cymbals, and double bass pedals. Drummers like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Keith Moon pushed the bounds of stamina and creativity. The drummer wasn't in the background anymore. He or she was the motor today. The drum kit is a global standard. From gospel churches to EDM stages, from punk garages to globe tours, and even as digital kits and drum machines grow the physicality of a live drum kit, the sticks, the skins, the sweat stays irreplaceable. It's a symbol of current rhythm, a union of millennia, where tradition meets innovation and where one drummer may speak. With 10 voices at once, the globe beats in hundreds of dialects, and so do its drums. From continent to continent, culture to culture, the drum has acquired numerous shapes, each conveying a particular identity, sound, and purpose. These aren't just instruments, they're cultural signatures fashioned by local hands and rooted in the rhythms of everyday life. In West Africa, the ja remains a heartbeat of community gatherings. It communicates in quick slaps and deep bass tones intended for storytelling and spontaneous discussion. Next to it, dundun gives the foundational pulse, a rhythmic anchor around which others can dance. In Africa, a drum ensemble isn't just music. It's a conversation between spirits, ancestors, and the living. In the Middle East, the dabuka, a goblet-shaped drum constructed from clay or metal, offers sharp, fast-paced beats important to belly dancing and classical Arabic music. Its voice is strong and articulate, requiring precision from its musician and movement from its listeners. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell a different story, one born from resilience and fusion. The conga, bongo, and wood symbolize the combination of African, indigenous, and Spanish elements. In Cuba, the mystical ba drums are used in Santaya. Rites. Each drum speaking a holy language, related to the orishas in Brazil, the thunder of Serra and Cuica Push. Samba parades through the streets, injecting pleasure into protest, prayer, and festival. And North Indian tablar dominate South and North Indian classical, respectively. These drums are so exact, they are set to pitch, blurring the distinction between rhythm and melody. Each finger movement matters. Each stroke carries centuries of tradition. Then there's the frame drum, one of the oldest in human history, occurring in everything from Persian daf to Irish bodhran, from shamanic implements to folk groups. Played with fingertips, mallets, or brushes, it's proven that even simplicity may be sacred. What unites them, all purpose, whether leading, dance, healing, ritual, or a revolution, each drum embodies the soul of its people. Their rhythms carry geography, history, and identity. The worldwide drum family isn't just diversified, it's universal. Because no matter where you travel, the planet still resonates with rhythm. As the 20th century drew to a conclusion, the sound of drums began to change, not in rhythm, but in texture. The physical gave way to the programmable, the sweaty palms, the wooden sticks. The calloused fingertips all began to share room with circuits, pads, and software. The age of digital drumming had come. It began in the 1970s with basic drum machines, early devices like the Rhythmicon and Roland. CR78 that employed analog circuits to replicate fundamental beats. At first, they sounded robotic, even weird, but musicians noticed something else: consistency, control, and boundless potential. Then came a revolution in 1980. Roland released the TR-808, a drum machine. So legendary, its deep, booming kick and precise snare would go on to define entire genres. Hip-hop, techno, electro, and trap were all formed in part by its synthetic pulse. It was no longer about replicating acoustic drums. It was about producing new sounds totally as digital audio improved. So did the Tools electronic drum sets. Like the Roland Fee drums, allowed drummers to play comfortably while triggering hundreds of sampled or generated tones. Artists could now rehearse, discreetly record without microphones, and replace drum kits with the push of a button and with computers. Emerged digital audio workstations, DAWs like Ableton, FL Studio, and Logic. Now anyone with a laptop could compose intricate rhythms combining kicks, snares, hi-hats, and sub-bass into enormous sound architectures. Finger drumming on MIDI pads became an art form of its own. Some worried this move marked the death of traditional drumming, a substitution of human feel with cold precision. But that didn't happen. Instead, hybridity arose. Acoustic drummers began mixing triggers and samples into there. Kit's producers started combining human-played drums with robotic rhythms. The organic and the synthetic found a groove together. Digital drums didn't destroy the past, they recreated it. And today, we live in a world where a single individual in a bedroom can build rhythms once needing full orchestras, where old grooves from Africa, Asia, and the Americas can be sampled, distorted, and given new life in neon-lit dance floors. The means have changed, but the objective stays the same: to move bodies, to shape time, to make silence speak across every era, every empire, and every evolution in technology. One thing has never altered. The drum remains our oldest and most enduring voice, from ancient fire circles to modern concert halls, from holy rituals to computerized dance floors. The drum has never been only about music. It's about connection to ourselves, to each other, to something bigger. It is the heartbeat we all share, not metaphorically, literally, because even before we're born, lying in the womb, the first rhythm we ever hear is that of our mother's heart, steady, safe, alive. And when life begins, we chase that beat forever. The drum has been our friend through worship and descent. It has marched by kings and risen. With rebels, it has resonated through temples and subway tunnels. It communicates in every language because it is a language, one that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the body, the bones, the blood. In moments of pain, we drum to lament. In moments of ecstasy, we drum to celebrate. And in the quiet spaces in between, we drum to remember who we are today. Percussion continues to evolve. You can discover handpan street musicians weaving new age beats on city corners, indigenous groups conserving traditional drumming practices, despite all odds, stadium drummers motivating masses, in synchrony children beating pots and pans with intuitive joy. Even artificial intelligence is learning rhythm, but no algorithm can recreate the human soul behind a single imperfect beat, because rhythm is not only calculated, it's felt. And maybe that's why the drum has outlived empires and trends, because deep down we all need the anchor of time, the same pulse that tells us we are here together now, no matter how complex our instruments evolve or how virtual our experiences grow. There will always be something profoundly grounded about flesh on skin, stick on hide, hand on wood. A beat, a breath, a beginning. The drum is not a remnant of the past. It is reminder that we were always designed to move in rhythm, to listen, to feel, to play. And as long as humanity endures, the drum will never be silent before. Manhattan became a forest of glass and steel. It was an island of shadows, not cast by skyscrapers, but by church steeples and sloping rooftops in the early 1800s. The skyline scarcely existed. The city clung to the southern edge of the island, a thick spread of brick towness, timber-framed businesses, and mud-packed. Roadways, buildings rarely climbed beyond 5 or 6 stories, not because ambition was missing, but because gravity had the final say. The taller the building, the more weight it carried. And with stone and brick, height came at a steep price. The walls had to be thicker at the bottom to sustain the upper levels, leaving less room inside and needing vast foundations. To build high was to build heavy, and heavy didn't make financial sense. So the city rose, horizontally spreading northward along a grid that had been built. In 1811, one of the boldest urban blueprints of its day. But underlying that grid, beneath the layers of cobblestone and soil, Manhattan carried a secret weapon, bedrock, deep, thick, and unyielding, the granite spine that ran beneath the island wood. One day sustained some of the biggest structures in human history, but for now it remained calm, untouched. Waiting life in early Manhattan was boisterous but grounded. Commerce bustled in the harbor, ships lined the piers, and horses clattered along narrow alleyways. The economy grew, immigration increased, and the island swelled with vitality. Yet, nevertheless, the city gripped. The ground, the sky, remained untouched. The only real vertical declarations were Church's Trinity Church being the most prominent. Its spire, built in 1846, soared over 280 feet, and for a period. It was the highest edifice in New York, but even that was more symbol than skyline. What no one knew then was that the skyline's future wouldn't be molded by stone or wood, but by iron, steel, and vision. And it wouldn't be restricted by the ground. It would rise far above it. Manhattan wasn't yet a metropolis of towers, but the stage was being set. The island was ready. The dream was growing, and soon the skyline would begin to extend. For millennia, gravity was the greatest architect in Manhattan. It kept structures, small towns, flat and human aspiration, anchored to the earth. But in the mid-9th century, 2 breakthroughs would tear the skyline wide open. One lifted people, the other lifted buildings. The first appeared in 1852, when an inventor named Elisha Otis unveiled his groundbreaking safety elevator. In a dramatic rally at the New York Crystal Palace, Otis stood on a stage, dangling high above a throng. He ordered the rope to be cut. The crowd gasped, but the platform didn't topple. A hidden mechanism secured the lift in place. With that single stunning moment, Otis changed the rules of height. Until previously, the upper levels of buildings were the cheapest. No one liked to walk stairs, but after elevators became safe and practical, those upper stories became prime space offering light, air, and status. The vertical city suddenly made economic sense, but being able to transfer people upward wasn't enough. Buildings still relied on load-bearing walls, which grew bigger and more cumbersome the higher they went. That's where innovation. Number 2 arrived, the steel skeleton. In the 1880s and 1890s, engineers began using steel frames to carry the weight of buildings, allowing outside walls to become thin curtains rather than hefty structural anchors. This approach, known as steel frame building, provided architects a new flexibility, built as high as the frame could hold. Suddenly, height was no longer a risk. It was a strategy. The technology had arrived. The ingredients were here in Manhattan, with its sturdy bedrock and burgeoning economy was the right canvas. The island's compact location promoted vertical thinking, and its reputation as a financial capital meant that everyone from banks to newspapers wanted their name visible in the clouds. The elevator made the sky accessible. The steel skeleton made the sky buildable. Together, they didn't only change architecture, they redefined what a city could be now. The race would begin, not outward, upward. By the late 19th century, New York City was no longer content to sprawl. It wanted to soar. The earth was full, the streets were packed, and the only area left to build was up. With steel frame construction and the elevator already established, Manhattan became a proving ground and the skyline a battlefield for ambition. The first rounds were fired in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building, home to Joseph Pulitzer's newspaper, Empire, soared 20 floors above Park Row. It was the highest office building in the world. Briefly, not to be outdone, the Park Row building claimed the title next in 1899, rising at 391 feet. Each new tower was a declaration, not simply of wealth, but of vision. To build higher was to say, we are the future. Soon the skyline began to blossom with steel giants. The Singer Building, finished in 1908, stood at 612 feet, becoming the tallest building in the world, and the first structure to surpass the height of the spire of Trinity Church, which had held the record for almost 50 years, but even that wouldn't last. In 1913, the Woolworth Building took the crown. Designed by architect Cass Gilbert and sponsored in cash by retail mogul Frank W. Woolworth, it climbed 792 feet, over 55 stories, in a magnificent display of neo-Gothic beauty. Dubbed the Cathedral of Commerce, the Woolworth wasn't only tall, it was grandiose, an architectural sermon on America's ascent as a modern power. But this wasn't just architectural rivalry. It was branding warfare. Corporations and institutions vied for the highest, most distinctive skyscrapers, towers, that would etch their names into the sky. Every new height was a headline, every silhouette a symbol. The tower became the ultimate billboard, everlasting, intimidating, hard to ignore, and beneath it all, the rhythm of progress hammered relentlessly. Steam shovels dug foundations into granite. Riveters hammered steel day and night. Immigrants and iron workers balanced on beams hundreds of feet in the air with no harnesses. Only tenacity and willpower. The skyline was no longer theoretical. It was genuine, and it was rising. As the 1920s surged across Manhattan, the skyline began to dance, not merely climb. This was the era of Art Deco, a time when building wasn't simply about height, but style. The Jazz Age poured elegance into steel and stone, and New York's structures became emblems of movement, light, and energy. The most spectacular of them all was the Chrysler Building. Completed in 1930, it stood 146 feet tall, briefly becoming the tallest building in the world, commissioned by car magnate Walter Chrysler. The tower wasn't just a monument to corporate success. It was a symphony of design. Its stainless steel spire, built in secret and hoisted into place overnight, shimmered in the sun like a crown. Ornamental eagles modeled after hood decorations jutted from the corners like guards of the future. With its curves, chevrons, and machine-age details, the Chrysler Building didn't merely scratch the sky, it charmed it. But the race wasn't over. Just a few blocks away, another titan was rising, the Empire State Building, constructed in 1931 during the depths of the Great Depression. It rose to 1,250 feet, snatching the title from Chrysler and retaining it for nearly 40 years, built in just 410 days, with hundreds of workers struggling through wind, frost, and steel dust. The Empire State wasn't simply a building, it was a message. New York continues. While much of the country struggled, Manhattan surged higher, and its skyscrapers symbolized the era's dual identity. Elegant but aggressive, optimistic yet competitive. The Art Deco style encapsulated the contrasts of the moment, geometric but elegant, modern but steeped in myth. Towers weren't merely practical. They were sculpted, shimmering at night, like beacons of possibility. And yet beneath all that glitter, there was purpose. These skyscrapers were created by baronses and moguls who sought more than profit. They desired legacy, a lasting position in the skyline and in history. By the end of the 1930s, Manhattan's profile had acquired shape. The city was no longer merely a capital of finance. It was a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that didn't whisper progress. It shouted it after World War II. Manhattan's Skyline began a new phase, one less decorative, more corporate. The elegance of Art Deco gave way to glass steel and straight lines. America was now a global superpower, and New York was the front office of that empire. The skyline changed suitably, not with ornamental spires, but with monuments of efficiency. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters built on the East River. A bold, boxy glass tower flanked by low marble wings. It signaled a shift in tone, global, diplomatic, modern. It wasn't just a building, it was an architectural statement about international order in the atomic era. And it set the tone for what would come next. Came the Lever House in 1952, and the Seeger's building in 1958, both defining instances of the international style. These towers, with their curtain walls of reflective glass and steel frames, were minimalist by design, bare of adornment, bereft of sentiment. They didn't appear like churches or castles. They looked like machines, exact, contemporary, and ruthlessly practical. The Sarum structure, designed by Ludwigmus. Fondera was notably important. Its bronze-tinted glass uniform grid and open. Plaza presented a new kind of urban presence, not to wow with flourishes, but to project order, discipline, and force. This was corporate architecture at its pinnacle, cold, gorgeous, and authoritative. As enterprises flourished, so did. The skyline Midtown became the nexus for America's largest corporations. Banks, media, companies, law firms, these new towers didn't compete for beauty. They competed for square footage, for location, and for presence. On the horizon, gone were the soaring spires, and gargoyles in their place stood mirrored monoliths, nameless giants that reflected not just the skies, but the desires of Wall Street. And yet, in their silence and simplicity, these towers shouted volumes. They presented the story of a country preoccupied with expansion, accuracy, and modernism. They defined the corporate era, altering the style and feel of cities throughout the globe. But even amid all this glass and steel, one thing stayed true. The skyline was still a symbol. Only now it whispered power rather than yelled beauty. By the late 1960s, New York was already a vertical masterpiece, yet it still had room to dream greater. That dream took shape at the southern point of Manhattan, where a pair of identical buildings would soon alter the skyline forever. They were bold, provocative, and unlike anything the world had ever seen. They were the twin towers of the World Trade Center, conceived as a hub for global commerce. The World Trade Center project was administered by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey architect Minoru Yamasaki. Built the skyscrapers using a radical, minimalist approach. Vertical lines aluminum cladding, no setbacks. Each tower would rise over one, 60 feet, dwarfing every building before them. The objective wasn't only architectural, it was ideological, a proclamation of global connection. A new temple for capitalism construction began in 1966. To make way, an entire neighborhood Radio Row was raised. The foundations required a novel technology known as the slurry wall, letting engineers to construct deep into the soft riverbed while holding back the Hudson. It was one of the most complex architectural marvels of its time when completed. In 1973, the Twin Towers weren't universally loved. Some commentators considered them sterile or boxy. Others regretted the loss of the elaborate towers of the past. But to many, the towers were pure presence, bold, powerful, and commanding. They didn't dance with the sky like the Chrysler. They didn't taper like the Empire State. They stood steadfast twin pillars of assurance and scale. More than just buildings, the World Trade Center became an international symbol of unity of American might. People flocked from around the world to visit the observation decks, to dine at windows on the world, or simply to stare up in wonder from the plaza below. For nearly 3 decades, the Twin Towers dominated Lower Manhattan. They anchored the skyline, giving it balance and seriousness. And while other cities erected larger structures, none carried the iconic weight of those 2 towers, towering side by side. The skyline had changed once again, this time not with adornment or artistry, but with enormous ambition. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the Manhattan skyline altered forever, not by cranes or construction, but by bloodshed and smoke. In less than 2 hours, the twin buildings of the World Trade Center collapsed into dust. Flames and twisted steel, thousands of lives were lost, and the 2 pillars that had previously defined Lower Manhattan were gone. The attack wasn't only an assault on people or structures, it was an assault on symbols, on everything. Those towers stood for commerce, modernity, freedom, aspiration. For decades, the Twin Towers had characterized the southern end of the island. Their clean, monolithic outlines had become visual shorthand for New York itself. Now that skyline was fragmented in. The days and weeks that followed, Lower Manhattan became a wound open, burning raw. Where previously there had been height and light, now was only void. And that absence reverberated. Photographs of the skyline appeared hollow. The familiar silhouette was broken, and the spot that had once pumped with world energy became known as Ground Zero for the first time in a century. Manhattan wasn't building up, it was mourning. The city grieved, but it also endured steelworkers, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers poured into the site, not to construct, but to salvage rubble. Was cleared, lives were honored, silence replaced the clatter of iron. In a city always hurrying forward, this was a forced pause, a long breath held in communal grief. But even in sadness, New York did what it had always done. It looked up. Discussions concerning Reconstruction were complicated, emotional, political. What should take the place of the towers? Should anything rise again? Could the skyline be rebuilt without? Removing the loss for years, the hole in the ground remains a reminder of what was and what was taken. It became sacred space, and yet slowly plans arose. Designs were drafted, cranes returned, steel returned, not to obliterate the tragedy, but to create something fresh beside it. But before anything was built, one reality stood plain. The skyline was no longer just a sign of power or ambition. It had become a memorial, a silhouette molded by both achievement, and the narrative wasn't ended. In the aftermath of catastrophe, a city known for speed, ambition, and movement paused, not to surrender, but to reimagine rebuilding the Manhattan skyline after 9/11s wasn't only a question of architecture. It was an issue of identity. What would rise? In place of the Twin Towers, could anything? The answers came slowly in 2003. A design by architect Daniel Leboskin was selected for the future World Trade Center location. It wasn't only about height. It was about mending memory and regeneration. The concept would integrate commercial space with public. Memorials, parks, transportation, and light. It wasn't a return to what had been. It was a proclamation of what could be. At the midst of it all stood a new tower, One World Trade Center, originally called the Freedom Tower, rising from the northwest corner of Ground Zero. It would become the highest building in the Western Hemisphere at 776 feet, a number picked to mimic the year of America's independence. But this wasn't just about patriotism. It was about defiance, about reaching up again despite loss. Construction began in 2006, and in 2014, One World Trade Center unveiled its doors. Clad in glittering glass and standing like a crystal obelisk, it didn't aim to replicate the past. It gave something fresh reflection, both literal and symbolic. The building varies with the sky, lighting, dimming, disappearing, depending on the light. It is presence without arrogance. Beside it, the 9/11's monument, built in 2011. Two huge voids where the original towers once stood, each with a continuous waterfall and the names of the victims inscribed into bronze. It's not simply part of the skyline. It's part of the city's essence. The new skyline took years to take shape. Other towers rose 3. WTC, 4 WTC, and 7 WTC, each one clean, sophisticated, and purposeful. Together, they reflect not simply a city rebuilt, but a city changed. New York didn't merely replace what was destroyed. It evolved. It honored the past while developing for the future. And in doing so, it reminded the world of something fundamentally American and deeply human. You can knock a city down, but you can't keep it from rising today. The Manhattan skyline is more than a collection of buildings. It is a living emblem of ambition, of endurance, of the American dream itself. No other shape in the world carries so much weight. It's carved into pop culture, history, and memory. You can draw it with 5 lines, and people will identify it quickly. It tells a story of daring engineers and fearless iron, workers of architects who dreamed spires that pierced clouds, and of immigrants who crossed oceans to help create them. It talks of risk, reward, and inventiveness, the continual churn of New York itself. It has never been finished, and it never will be. The skyline is alive, always changing. In recent years, it's stretched much higher, but not in Lower Manhattan this time. The vertical race moved uptown along Billionaire's Row. Extremely slim residential structures like 432, Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, and 111 West 57th Street now stand like needles over Midtown. These skyscrapers are wonders of engineering pencil, thin-wind disted, and designed for the super-rich. Critics call them sky-piercing displays of inequity. Others consider them as miracles of contemporary ambition. Meanwhile, in Hudson Yards, an altogether new neighborhood has developed with sparkling glass buildings, public art, and corporate headquarters. Emerging where rail yards previously stretched, the skyline now reaches. Farther west, developing with the city's changing needs and objectives. But even as it rises, the skyline retains its history. Closely, the Empire State Building still shines at night. The Chrysler still gleams at morning, and One World Trade Center stands solemn and proud. The skyline remembers what came before, even as it aspires for what's next, more than any monument or statue. It is the skyline that characterizes New York, not merely in form, but in purpose. It is a site where humanity dared to climb upward again and again through booms, busts, wars, and wounds. A metropolis of millions mirrored in steel and glass. It doesn't only identify where the city ends, it marks where dreams begin, because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It's simply the next floor.